giant mail-order bride rejected for being too fat, until the mountain man said, "She's perfect." Now let's dive into the interesting story. The wind howled like a living thing across the Montana plains, carrying with it the bite of early winter. Snowflakes whirled in the air, settling on the brim of the stagecoach driver's hat as he cracked his whip, urging the weary horses toward the small frontier town of Willow Creek. Inside the coach, Clara Benson pressed her gloved hands together for warmth. The thin wool offered little protection against the chill seeping through the cracked windows. Her heart pounded faster with each mile that drew her closer to her destination, and to the man who was supposed to be her husband. She reached into her bag and touched the letter again, its edges worn from countless rereadings. The words, written in a strong, confident hand, had filled her with hope when she'd first received them. "I seek a woman of good character. Someone to share the quiet life with on the frontier. I don't care for fancy girls, only a kind heart and strong hands to help me make a home. Silas Reed." Those words had felt like salvation to Clara, a chance to start anew after a lifetime of being told she was too big, too much, too different. She'd imagined arriving to a man who looked past her size and saw her heart. But when the coach finally rolled into Willow Creek, the reality was far colder than the weather. The driver opened the door, shouting over the wind, "End of the line, miss?" Clara stepped down into the snow, her boots sinking deep. She stood tall, adjusting her coat, her breath fogging in the air. Around her, townsfolk went still. Men leaned on railings, women paused in their errands. Every eye seemed to fix on her, not with curiosity but with quiet judgment. A boy whispered, "She's huge," before his mother hissed and pulled him away. Clara swallowed hard, lifting her chin. She would not let their stares undo her. She had traveled hundreds of miles, sold her mother's locket to afford passage, and carried her dignity like armor. She asked for directions to Mr. Silas Reed's homestead, and a man pointed toward the livery where a tall, lean figure stood waiting. Silas turned as she approached. His eyes flicked over her from head to toe, and his expression hardened immediately. He looked nothing like she'd imagined. His face was sharp, his mouth thin, his eyes calculating. "Mr. Reed?" she asked softly, offering a hopeful smile. "I'm Clara. Clara Benson." For a moment he said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy and humiliating. Then he muttered, "You're her?" "Yes, sir," she said, clutching her hands together. "I came as you asked. I know I'm a little late, the stage was delayed by—" "You didn't say you were?" His voice trailed off as he gestured vaguely at her figure. "This large." Clara froze, her cheeks burning. "I didn't think it mattered," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "You said you wanted someone strong, someone—" "I didn't mean that kind of strong," he snapped, loud enough for the townsfolk to hear. "You think I'd want to marry a woman twice my size? People would laugh me out of town." A few men chuckled nearby. Clara's eyes darted to the ground, tears threatening. "Please," she whispered, "I came all this way." Silas took her small trunk and dropped it into the snow with a dull thud. "Stage'll be back through in a week. Maybe someone else'll take pity on you." He turned and walked off, leaving her standing alone in the cold. The townspeople avoided her gaze. One woman murmured, "Poor thing," before hurrying her child indoors. The blacksmith shook his head and closed his shop door. Within minutes, the busy little town returned to life, pretending she wasn't there. Clara stood motionless until the last echo of footsteps faded. Snow gathered on her hat, her coat, her lashes. Her hands trembled as she bent to pick up her trunk, but it was too heavy to lift. She looked down the empty road, the mountains looming in the distance like silent sentinels. She didn't know where to go. There was no inn that would take a woman alone, no friend to call upon. Just the cold and the wide, uncaring wilderness. With a deep, shaky breath, she straightened. "Then I'll find my own way," she whispered to herself. And with that, Clara Benson turned her back on Willow Creek and began to walk, one slow step after another, into the white silence of the mountains. Each step away from the town felt like leaving behind a world that never wanted her. But ahead, unseen through the drifting snow, a fire burned in a cabin not far away. And in that cabin lived a man whose eyes would one day look at her not with judgment, but with awe. The mountains loomed high and silent, their peaks buried in snow and clouds. Only the sound of cracking branches and the distant howl of a wolf broke the stillness. Far from any town, Elias Stone moved through the forest with the sure-footed ease of a man who belonged to it. His thick coat was worn, his beard streaked with frost, and his rifle hung loosely over one broad shoulder. He was a man carved from solitude, quiet, deliberate, and unbothered by the cold that would have driven others mad. He stopped beside a frozen creek, listening. The wilderness spoke in whispers, the creak of old trees, the scurry of a rabbit under snow. His hound, Jasper, sniffed the wind, tail stiff. "What is it, boy?" Elias murmured, kneeling. The dog whined softly and took off toward the ridgeline. Elias followed, boots crunching through drifts. The light was fading fast, the kind of dim, blue twilight that blurred the line between day and night. Then through the trees he saw something that didn't belong. At first it looked like a bundle of fabric tossed aside by the wind. But as he drew closer, his heart kicked hard in his chest. It was a woman. She lay half buried in snow, her coat torn, her lips pale as ice. Strands of dark hair stuck to her cheeks, and her hands were curled like a child's, frozen and still. "Lord have mercy," Elias muttered, dropping to his knees. He brushed the snow from her face and felt for a pulse, faint but there. Without hesitation, he slid his arms beneath her and lifted her from the ground. She was heavy but not in a way that troubled him. She was solid, real, alive. Jasper barked and trotted ahead as Elias trudged through the drifts, carrying her toward his cabin, a sturdy log structure nestled against the pines. The wind bit at his face, but he didn't stop until the door creaked open and warmth rushed out to meet him. Inside, he laid her gently near the fire. He stripped off her wet coat, wrapped her in a thick wool blanket, and stirred the embers to life. The orange glow spread over her skin, revealing the fullness of her face, the curve of her shoulders, the delicate tremble of her breath. Elias sat back, rubbing his beard. "What in God's name were you doing out there?" he muttered softly. He poured a small cup of broth from the pot on the hearth and held it to her lips. "Come on now. Don't you quit on me." She stirred faintly, a groan escaping her lips. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then settling on his face. "Where?" Her voice was weak. "Where am I?" "My cabin," Elias said. His voice was deep, rough like gravel. "Found you near the creek. You'd have frozen to death if Jasper hadn't caught your scent." She blinked, dazed. I didn't mean to come this far. I just..." Her eyes filled with tears and she turned away. "They didn't want me. Said I was too fat to be anyone's bride." Elias frowned, not understanding. "Who did?" "The man I came to marry. He looked at me like I was some mistake. Said I lied." Everyone stared. She swallowed hard. "I didn't lie. I just hoped maybe someone could love me anyway." Elias leaned back, his expression unreadable in the firelight. For a long time the only sound was the crackle of burning wood. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Then they're fools." She looked up, startled. He met her gaze. "Ain't no shame in bein' strong-built. The mountains don't take kindly to frail folks. You've got more sense than any of those town snobs walking out here on your own." She let out a shaky laugh. "It wasn't bravery. It was heartbreak." "Same thing sometimes," he replied. For a while neither spoke. The fire popped and hissed. Jasper curled at her feet, tail thumping once as if in approval. Elias stood and added another log to the fire. "You'll stay here till you're strong again. Ain't safe to travel in this weather." She hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden." "You ain't," he said simply. "I don't keep company often, but I reckon the Lord had a reason for sendin' you my way." Her eyes filled again, but this time with something softer than sorrow, something almost like relief. As she drifted into sleep, Elias sat by the fire, watching the shadows play across her face. There was a peace there he hadn't known in years. Something about her presence, fragile yet resilient, stirred a long-forgotten warmth in his chest. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains. But inside, the cabin glowed with a quiet kind of grace, a shelter not just from the cold, but from the cruelty of the world she'd left behind. And though neither of them knew it yet, that night marked the beginning of something rare and unshakable. Two hearts, wounded by loneliness, beginning to thaw beside the same fire. The storm raged for 3 days. Wind screamed against the cabin walls, snow piled high against the door, and the world beyond the frosted window vanished into white. But inside, the fire burned steady, a soft, golden heartbeat in the dark wilderness. Clara woke to the smell of strong coffee and crackling pine. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. The quilt around her was thick and warm, her feet toasty under a pile of furs. Then she saw the man by the fire, tall, broad, steady, and everything came rushing back. "You're awake," Elias said without turning. His deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Good. You need to eat." He poured steaming broth into a tin cup and handed it to her. His hands were rough and large, yet his touch was careful, almost gentle. "Thank you," Clara whispered, taking it. The warmth seeped through her fingers, and the rich aroma made her stomach twist with hunger. She sipped, then smiled faintly. This is very good. He gave a quiet grunt. It's elk bone broth. Ain't fancy, but it'll put life back in you. As she drank, she looked around. The cabin was small but tidy, a bed in one corner, shelves lined with jars and tools, animal pelts hanging by the door. Everything had purpose, nothing wasted. It felt safe. When she caught Elias glancing at her from across the fire, she blushed. You must think me a fool walking into a storm like that. He shook his head. You were desperate. Folks do foolish things when the world turns mean. She hesitated. You don't think less of me? He looked at her, really looked, and the flicker of firelight danced in his eyes. No, ma'am. You faced death head-on and didn't quit. Most men wouldn't last half a day out there. His words sank deep. She wasn't used to hearing strength in the same sentence as her name. By the second day, color had returned to Clara's cheeks. She insisted on helping, folding blankets, scrubbing pans, even sweeping the floor. Elias watched her move about his cabin, her size and presence filling the small space with warmth he hadn't known he missed. When she laughed at Jasper's clumsy attempt to steal bread, the sound startled him, soft, melodic, something he hadn't heard in years. You laugh easy, he said, half smiling. She blushed. I suppose I'm trying to remember how. Laughter was rare where I came from. Then maybe you're due some, he replied, setting down his carving knife. He had been whittling a new handle for his axe, but now his hands stilled as he studied her. Her hair glowed like polished chestnut in the firelight, her eyes kind and curious. There was no artifice, no vanity, only honesty. She caught him staring and quickly looked away. You must think me strange talking so much. I'm just not used to silence. Silence ain't so bad, he said. But it sounds better with a voice like yours in it. Her heart gave a flutter she couldn't explain. By the third day the storm began to fade. Outside, the snow had piled higher than the windowsill. The world glistened, untouched, pure. Clara stood near the door, peering out as sunlight broke through the clouds. It's beautiful, she murmured. Elias came beside her, towering but quiet. Ain't many folks left to see it, he said. That's why I stay. The world out there, too loud, too cruel. She turned to him. You live up here all alone? He nodded. Used to try the towns now and then. But people talk. Look too close. I've got enough ghosts already. She hesitated before asking softly, what ghosts? He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted toward the mountain peaks, his jaw tight. War took my brothers. Fire took my wife. Silence took the rest. Clara's eyes softened. I'm sorry. He shrugged, voice low. I stopped looking for what was gone. Until, she pressed gently. He looked at her then and she felt something heavy in his gaze, something unspoken but real. Until you showed up in the snow. For a long, trembling moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic crackle of the fire. Then Elias cleared his throat roughly and stepped back. You'll need new boots. Yours are near ruined. I'll mend them tomorrow. She smiled faintly. You've done enough already. Can't leave you half-fixed, he said. Wouldn't sit right. As he turned away, she watched him, the way his broad shoulders moved, the quiet steadiness of him. He was a man carved by loss, yet somehow still gentle. That night, as snow melted slowly from the roof, Clara lay awake listening to the wind whisper outside. The firelight flickered over Elias's face as he dozed in the chair, his dog curled by his feet. She realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the cold. Not of being alone. Somewhere deep in her heart, a small, fragile warmth had taken root, the kind that grows even in the harshest winter. When the blizzard finally broke, the world outside Elias's cabin lay buried under a heavy silence. Snow blanketed the trees, softening every edge. The air was so crisp it glittered. Smoke curled lazily from the cabin's chimney, rising into a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Clara stood by the window, the hem of her borrowed wool skirt brushing the floor. She watched sunlight glint off the snow and felt something inside her shift, like a heart learning to beat again. It's beautiful, she said softly. Elias was beside the door, pulling on his coat. But beauty don't mean safe. Snow this deep hides trouble. He reached for his rifle and slung it across his back. I'll go check the traps down by the ridge. Shouldn't be long. Clara nodded. Be careful. He met her eyes, that same quiet steadiness that made her pulse race, then opened the door and stepped into the cold. For a while, she busied herself with simple chores, stirring the fire, folding blankets, sweeping what little floor space the cabin offered. Jasper followed her everywhere, his tail wagging happily, as if he'd already decided she belonged there. She hummed a tune her mother once sang, soft, sweet, something that spoke of home. But peace is fragile in the mountains. By midday she heard hooves crunching through the snow, more than one horse. She frowned, setting down the broom. Through the frost-glazed window she saw 3 men approaching. The lead rider's posture was rigid, familiar, and when the sunlight caught his face her stomach dropped. Silas Reed. Her heart began to hammer. She backed away from the window as the men dismounted, their boots sinking deep into the snow. The door swung open before she could reach it. Silas stepped inside without knocking, the cold air trailing behind him. His eyes darted around the cabin before landing on her. "Well," he drawled, a smirk curling his lips. "Ain't this a surprise?" The runaway bride, holed up with a mountain man. Clara's throat tightened. "I didn't run away," she said quietly. "You left me in the snow." He chuckled. "You should be thanking me. I saved myself a lifetime of embarrassment. You think anyone wants to see that walking beside him?" Behind him, one of the men snorted, trying not to laugh. Clara stood her ground, though her hands trembled. "I don't care what you think anymore, Silas. You're cruel and I pity you." The smirk vanished from his face. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You watch that mouth of yours. Folks in town been talking, say you ran off with supplies, maybe even stole from me." "That's a lie." "Is it?" he sneered. "Then how'd you end up with this fine cabin and food on your plate? Maybe this wild man of yours don't mind sharing his bed with a thief." Clara's eyes widened. "You'll not speak of him that way." "Or what?" Silas mocked, leaning in close. "You'll sit on me?" The cruel laughter of his men filled the small room. Then from behind them, a voice like rolling thunder cut through the air. "Get away from her." Silas turned, startled. Elias stood in the doorway, rifle in hand, snow melting on his shoulders. His eyes burned like embers beneath his fur-lined hat. "Stone," Silas said with forced bravado. "Didn't realize you had company. You sure know how to pick 'em." Elias stepped inside, his presence filling the room. "You got about 10 seconds to leave before I throw you out myself." Silas's smirk faltered. "Now hold on. I just came to warn you. This woman, she's got a history of lies. You think you're the first fool she's tricked." Elias didn't blink. "Only fool here is the man who can't see worth when it's right in front of him." The words hung in the air like a strike of lightning. Silas's jaw twitched. "You'll regret crossing me, mountain man." Elias's grip on the rifle tightened. "I've got no regrets, Reed. But you might if you're still standing here in 5 seconds. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Silas spat into the snow at Elias's boots and turned. "Enjoy your charity case," he growled. "She'll bring you nothing but trouble." They left in a cloud of hoofbeats, disappearing down the trail. Elias shut the door firmly and turned to Clara. Her hands were clasped to her chest, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He's always been cruel. I didn't mean for any of that." "Don't," Elias said, voice soft but steady. "You got nothing to apologize for. I don't take kindly to men who think cruelty makes 'em strong." She nodded, her lip trembling. "I don't understand why people hate what they don't even try to know." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Because they're afraid of what they can't break." Their eyes met. The firelight flickered between them, reflecting in her tears. He reached out, hesitated, then brushed his thumb gently along her cheek, wiping away a tear. His hand lingered for the briefest moment before he stepped back. "You're safe here, Clara," he said simply. "Long as I'm breathing, no one will harm you." Her breath caught, warmth flooding through her chest despite the chill outside. For the first time in her life, someone had stood up for her, not out of pity but out of respect. As night fell, Clara sat by the fire, the sound of the wind now softer, almost kind. Elias worked quietly at the table, repairing a broken trap, but every now and then his eyes drifted to her, and she caught him watching. Neither spoke of what happened. But something had changed between them. The walls that once kept them safe from the world now kept something precious inside, something tender and growing. The wind had gone still, the forest unervingly quiet, too quiet. Elias felt it before he saw it. The way the birds had vanished from the trees, the uneasy way Jasper's ears perked and tail stiffened. Instinct, honed by years of living with danger, told him something was wrong. He set his axe against the porch rail and scanned the tree line. Snow had begun to fall again, gentle flakes drifting down like feathers, but there was movement in the shadows. a flicker of light where no light should be. He turned sharply toward the cabin. Clara. She was by the fire, kneading dough for biscuits, humming softly. She looked up, startled. What is it? Get your coat, he said, voice low and tight. Now. Confusion flashed across her face, but she obeyed, sensing the tension in his tone. Elias, what's happening? He grabbed his rifle, eyes still on the dark woods. We've got company, and not the kind that knocks. A split second later, an arrow whistled through the air and struck the doorframe with a sharp thunk. Clara gasped, dropping the dough bowl. Elias swore under his breath. Stay low. Another arrow, this one wrapped in burning cloth, arced through the air and landed on the cabin's roof. Within seconds, flames licked the wooden shingles. Fire! Clara cried. Elias. He was already moving, grabbing a pail of water and dousing the flames through the window. But the attackers were relentless. 3 of them, maybe more, circling the cabin, shouting curses through the trees. Read, Elias growled, eyes narrowing. Coward couldn't stand losing face. Smoke thickened, the air turning sharp and acrid. Elias turned to Clara, his voice urgent but calm. There's no saving the cabin. We head for the ridge. Stay behind me. She nodded, trembling, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. He kicked open the back door just as another flaming arrow struck the porch. The blast of cold air hit them, but it was cleaner than the smoke choking the cabin. Run, he ordered. Clara stumbled through the snow, her breath coming in ragged clouds. Jasper barked beside her, guiding her path. Behind them, gunshots cracked through the air. Bullets whined past, biting into trees. Elias fired back once, twice, short, controlled bursts that echoed through the valley. One attacker cried out and vanished into the dark. Keep going, Clara, he shouted. I'm not leaving you, she cried, voice breaking. Then stay close. They reached a clearing where the snow was deep enough to slow their pursuers. Elias crouched behind a fallen log, reloading his rifle. Clara knelt beside him, chest heaving. You shouldn't have to fight for me, she whispered. He glanced at her, eyes fierce and unwavering. Ain't fighting for you. Fighting with you. There's a difference. Her heart swelled, even in the chaos, his words wrapped around her like armor. The last of the attackers broke through the trees, shouting, Stone! You'll pay for harboring that so. Before Elias could raise his rifle, Clara rose to her feet. Fury blazed through her, years of ridicule, rejection, and cruelty snapping like a whip. She grabbed the heavy iron shovel leaning against the log and swung with all her strength. The man went down hard, his weapon flying from his hands. The others, seeing their leader fall, turned and fled into the forest. Silence fell again, broken only by the crackle of fire from the direction of the cabin. Clara stood frozen, chest heaving, shovel trembling in her hands. Elias rose slowly, lowering his rifle. You saved my life, he said quietly. Her lip quivered. I just did what needed to be done. He stepped closer, eyes full of something raw and unguarded. You're something else, Clara Benson? The cabin was gone. Flames devoured what little they'd built, the warmth, the comfort, the peace. Yet standing there in the snow, shoulder to shoulder, it didn't feel like the end. Elias looked at her, the fire reflecting in his eyes. A home can burn, he said softly, but a heart can rebuild. And I ain't letting you face another winter alone. Clara's breath hitched. You mean that? He nodded. Every word. The snow began to fall harder, covering the ashes of the cabin in a pure white shroud. Clara took his hand, rough, warm, strong, and for the first time she didn't feel too large or too much. She felt exactly enough. Together, they turned from the fire and began the long walk toward the river valley, where the mountains met the open sky. Behind them, the storm swallowed the past. Ahead, a new kind of life waited, built not from timber but from trust. The storm had passed, leaving behind a glittering silence that blanketed the mountains like forgiveness. The ruins of Elias's cabin still smoldered days later, blackened timbers jutting from the snow, a memory turned to ash. But Elias and Clara were alive. And that, to him, meant everything. They found temporary shelter in an old hunter's outpost halfway down the ridge, a rough log structure with a leaky roof and one good window. It wasn't much, but it was dry, and when Clara saw the single bed tucked in the corner, her face went pink. I'll take the floor, Elias said immediately, clearing his throat. You'll freeze if you do. I'll be fine, she murmured, avoiding his gaze. Clara. His voice was gentle but firm. You've been through enough. Don't argue with me on this. So she didn't. She watched him spread his blanket by the hearth, his massive frame filling the room with a quiet, solid kind of presence. He worked wordlessly, the same way he chopped wood or tended a wound, steady, capable, uncomplaining. That night, as the wind howled outside, Clara lay awake staring at the rough log ceiling. Her body ached, her hands blistered, but her heart, it was full. For the first time in years she wasn't alone. Days turned into weeks. They rebuilt together, not the cabin, not yet, but their rhythm. Each morning, Elias rose before dawn to chop wood while Clara prepared breakfast over the fire. Thick slices of fried bread, beans simmered with salt pork, and the strong coffee he loved. "You make better coffee than I ever did," he said one morning, breaking into a rare smile. "That's because I don't burn it black," she teased back, and the sound of her laughter filled the cabin like sunlight. After breakfast, they worked side by side, repairing fences, hauling stone, and carving new logs for a fresh cabin that would stand on higher ground, away from where the fire had taken the first one. Clara surprised Elias with her endurance. Though her hands trembled and her arms ached, she never quit. When he offered to take over, she'd just shake her head and say, "I'm stronger than I look." And he'd murmur, "Ain't that the truth?" One afternoon they paused by the riverbank to rest. The ice had begun to melt, and the sun glinted on the water. Clara sat with her skirts tucked under her, cheeks flushed from work. "Elias," she said softly, "why do you live up here alone? A man like you could have had a wife years ago." He stared at the river for a long time before answering. "Had one once. She didn't care for the life I chose. Said the mountain was too cruel, too lonely." His voice dropped lower. "She left when the first winter came." Clara's breath caught. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. Some folks aren't built for silence. But you," his gaze lifted to her, steady, unflinching. "You don't flinch from hard things. You face 'em." Her heart stuttered in her chest. "You make me sound braver than I am." "Maybe. Or maybe you just never had someone see what's already there." They fell into quiet after that, but it wasn't an awkward silence. It was warm, like the mountain itself was holding its breath around them. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the peaks, Elias noticed Clara standing in the doorway of the cabin, her figure framed in gold light. She looked out over the valley, her shawl fluttering gently in the breeze. "You ever regret comin' here?" he asked quietly behind her. She turned, eyes soft. "Once I thought my life was over when they sent me away from that town. But now," she smiled faintly, "now I think maybe I was just being led somewhere better." Elias stepped closer. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off him even through the chill. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Clara. And the kindest." Her throat tightened. "Elias." He hesitated, then took her hand, calloused meeting calloused. "When this cabin's done," he said, voice low, "it won't just be mine. If you'll have it, it'll be ours." Her lips parted, eyes shimmering. "You mean that?" He nodded, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "You've already made this mountain feel like home again. Don't reckon I could face another winter without you." A tear rolled down her cheek, not from sorrow but something softer, freer. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped forward, laid her hand gently against his chest, feeling the steady thud of his heart. And in that wordless moment, Elias Stone, the man the world called cold and fearsome, bent his head slightly, resting his forehead against hers. No vows. No witnesses. Just two souls finding warmth where everyone said there could be none. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle and slow, like a blessing. And though the cabin was still unfinished, inside that rough shelter, a home had already been built. One made of trust, courage, and a love that had quietly, stubbornly taken root. Spring came slow to the mountains, creeping down from the peaks like a cautious promise. The snow melted into silver streams, and the wildflowers began to bloom along the trails where Clara and Elias worked side by side, finishing the cabin they had built together. The new home stood tall and sturdy, stronger than the first. Wide beams, a broad porch, and windows that let in the golden morning light. Clara had carved wild rose vines into the doorframe herself, her initials intertwined with Elias's. "This time," she had said with a smile, "it's built for two." Elias couldn't argue. Every plank carried her touch, her patience, her laughter, her stubborn heart that refused to give up. One morning word came from town. A supply rider brought it, cautious, hesitant, as if afraid to face Elias directly. "Folks are talkin'," he said, shifting in his saddle. "They say Reed's gone. Rode off after that night you run him off. But the preacher and his wife, they've been feelin' mighty guilty about what they did to the lady." Elias crossed his arms. "Guilty don't build back what they burned." The rider nodded toward Clara, who stood in the doorway wiping her hands on her apron. They'd like to make it right, ma'am? Invite you to town proper. Maybe even hold a service. Clara's eyes widened. A service? He smiled faintly. A wedding, if you're still willin' to. Elias turned to her. We don't need their approval, Clara. I know, she said softly. But maybe it's not about them. Maybe it's about showing them what real love looks like. He studied her courage, her gentle fire, and finally nodded. Then we'll go. The town was silent when they arrived. Clara sat tall on the wagon beside Elias, her dress freshly pressed, her hair braided neatly under her bonnet. Yet she could feel the stares, the same eyes that once looked away in disgust now wide with disbelief. Children peeked from behind fences. The women whispered. But this time Clara didn't lower her gaze. She'd survived fire, rejection, and storm. There was nothing left to fear. When they stopped before the church, the preacher's wife hurried out, wringing her hands. Miss Benson, Clara, please forgive us. We were wrong. Clara smiled kindly. You were, she said, her voice steady but not cruel. But forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you choose. And I've already chosen. Tears filled the woman's eyes. God bless you. Elias helped Clara down from the wagon, his hands steady under hers. Inside, the small church smelled of cedar and fresh flowers. Someone had hung wild roses along the altar, the same kind that grew outside their mountain home. As the preacher began the vows, Elias's deep voice filled the space. I don't have much, he said, and I don't say words fancy. But I reckon God made you for this life, for me. You're strong where I'm rough, soft where I'm hard. You're what was missin' all those winters. Clara's voice trembled as she replied, and you saw me when no one else did. You saw more than my size, you saw my worth. You made me believe I was enough. Elias took her hands, his thumb brushing the silver band he'd carved from a melted bullet, the same one that once nearly took his life. You're more than enough, Clara. You're perfect. The word hung in the air, echoing like a hymn. The same word once used to mock her now sounded holy on his lips. When they stepped outside, the townspeople stood waiting. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a small boy, the blacksmith's son, broke free from the crowd and ran up to Clara, handing her a bundle of wildflowers. You look pretty, ma'am, he said shyly. Clara knelt, accepting them with a smile. Thank you, sweetheart. The crowd softened. Applause rippled through the street, hesitant at first, then growing. Men removed their hats. Women wiped their eyes. Even the preacher bowed his head in shame and respect. For the first time, Clara felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. The town that had rejected her was now seeing her, truly seeing her. That evening Elias and Clara rode home through the valley as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The cabin glowed in the distance, smoke curling from its chimney. Jasper ran ahead, barking joyfully. Clara leaned her head against Elias's shoulder. Do you think people can really change? He glanced down at her, his smile small but sure. If they've got something worth changin' for. And what about you? She teased softly. He chuckled. I already did. The day you walked into my life. She smiled through quiet tears, her heart swelling with peace. The mountains, once cruel and cold, now shimmered in gold light, vast, eternal, forgiving. As they reached the cabin, Elias lifted her down and whispered, Welcome home, Mrs. Stone. And beneath the endless Montana sky, the woman once deemed too much finally had everything she'd ever wanted. Not just love, but a place she truly belonged. Because sometimes, it takes the rough hands of a mountain man to show the world what real beauty looks like.